I'm here with Ade of Darkest Era to talk about Wither on the Vine, out September 30th on Candlelight Records. How are you doing today?
I'm great, mate. Yeah, not too bad at all. Just shaking off a little bit of a cold, but otherwise all good.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me about this record, a record that I'm in love with, deeply in love with. So I definitely want to pick your brain about it. And I want to start off by asking you about how did you get to this album? Is this album a little bit of the continuation of where the two previous records took you, or do you feel like this record kind of has its own individual journey?
It's its own individual thing, really. I mean, there was a big gap in time from the previous record. Basically, the band just sort of like, we just sort of hit a brick wall in terms of our momentum. We had a whole bunch of shows and things planned that sort of fell through, and then like real life kind of got in the way. So we were just kind of busy doing other things, to be honest. And then, you know, a few years passed and we were doing like a few shows and things. But I didn't have really like material in the bag for a next record. So I was kind of thinking, I basically sort of went back to the start and had a real think about what I wanted to do with the project, you know, with the direction and really what I wanted the band to be about. And I thought, you know, what is this next record going to be, if there's going to be a next record? So eventually I sort of pulled together a few ideas, and then the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And that kind of gave me a chance to sort of refocus and spend a bit of time just on those things that I'd written, and the things that we jammed as a band. And I thought, you know what, there's something kind of interesting here. This is worth like really pursuing. So we made sort of a slight divergence from the last record stylistically, and I thought this is an interesting sort of pathway to go down. So that's kind of how we arrived at this album, really. Essentially, I started like a side project just for fun in between these two records, and it was basically like Dio worship, like just straight up heavy metal. And what that allowed me to do was to sort of stop trying to cram so many like influences and things that I enjoy into the one project. So that gave me a little bit more breathing space with Darkest Era. So that sort of informed how this record went, and it sort of, I think, ended up having a bit more of like its own identity this time around, is the difference, I would say. So that's sort of how we arrived at it, really.
So what do you feel is the most unique element on this album that allows this record to have that unique fingerprint that you're talking about?
I don't know, really. I think this time around, just the mix, because we've always had like a mix of influences, right? So even like from the first album, there's been a few different things going on. There's been like some folk and traditional heavy metal and like a doom metal atmosphere. But it's just been in like different concentrations across the mix. I think this time around, everything's just sort of sitting at the right, level, really. Like it's sort of, it just came out sort of more cohesive sounding, I guess. I don't know, really. I mean, it's probably for other people to say what they think makes it unique, but for me, the fact that there's a combination of, I guess, classic metal singing and clean singing, along with a kind of an atmosphere that you might associate more typically with black metal, and then more, doom metal style guitar playing. I think these three things probably in combination is what maybe gives it its unique atmosphere, maybe. But what I've noticed with this is you talk to different people and they all pull out something kind of different. So people seem to hone in on different aspects of the record depending on who you talk to, really. So yeah, I find that quite interesting, really.
It is a sign that the album has kind of its own life, because depending on what kind of personal baggage you're coming into the listening experience, you're going to take something completely different from it. So it's an album that never gets old. It kind of has a life of its own. And when I was listening to it, I was really wondering about the chicken and the egg. And what I mean by that is that what came first here? Did the creative process dictate the sound that you created for the album, or your vision for the album dictated the creative process that you took?
I think it's just maybe a natural product of the fact that myself and some of the other guys are really into a lot of different kinds of things. And like me in particular, like I have this bad habit of being very influenced by whatever it is I am listening to at the time, or not influenced, but inspired, I guess. So when I sit down and play guitar, for example, like I'll be maybe doing black metal riffing or something, but I'll maybe be thinking of a doom vocal melody over it or something like this here. So it's just really the natural way I write, because I'm like really passionate about all sorts of subgenres, if you like. So it wasn't really like a grand design where we sat down and said, hey, we should like definitely do music that has like all this mix of different things, or we should do something that has this kind of sound. It's just sort of a product of what makes us tick musically, if that makes sense. And to be honest, like there was a few things where I was consciously trying to sort of widen the margins a little bit, or throw in things that I thought like were really different for us. And at the time I thought, yeah, this is like, you know, this is not what would be expected of us. But really, when you listen back to it, it's not a million miles away from what we've kind of done before, because at the end of the day, it still has our signature on it. It still has like mine and Sarah's guitar playing, and Crum's vocals, and that, no matter, you know, you try to make things maybe a little bit different sounding, but those unique identifiers of the musicians kind of are like ballast, if you like, keeping it in sort of this one area. So if that makes sense.
You mentioned earlier when I asked you about the main fingerprint of the sound on this record, you mentioned that it's going to be more up to the listener, and it's hard to define it because there's so many different pieces. When I was listening to the album, that was one of the things that jumped out at me, is that it's impossible to put this record under a specific umbrella. Are you concerned about that? Because these days it seems like everybody wants to put everybody else under a specific category, if you will. And this record is nearly impossible to fit in one single category.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just not, well, we've encountered this since we started, really, where more so, I mean, definitely for the first two records, like we sat between a lot of stools, right? And the difficulty with that is certain people who are like, I don't know whether they're more open-minded or whatever, but that's like perfectly fine for them, because they can see the product as the whole, right? Or they can listen to the album as a whole and kind of get what you're doing. But other people are like, you know, say, or they only hear the traditional heavy metal influences, and they like, oh, what is this other kind of atmosphere? This doesn't sound like Saxon or Judas Priest to me, so I'm not interested. Or someone else might, you know, kind of latch on to the black metal atmosphere, but think, oh, it has clean vocals, so I'm not interested, you know. So I mean, that was one of the reasons, like I mentioned, why I did like a heavy metal side project thing, so that, because I kind of thought, well, I kind of want to do something like that as its own thing, and then not be trying to put in so much like traditional heavy metal this time around into this record. And I think this time around, it sort of helped in that it sort of fits more under a few like less umbrellas, right? So last time around, there was a lot of, you know, people categorize it in a lot of different crazy ways. I think this time around, you know, it's like dark metal, you know, doom metal, touches of black or something. So I think it's a bit more easily categorized this time around. And I was aware of that, because like you say, people need to categorize something straight away, or a lot of people won't give it the time of day, because they just like, they want to know what it is straight away so that they can process it. And, you know, I think that's a shame, really, but
yeah,
it doesn't make it easy. It doesn't make it any easier for us, but like, it's just the way we write music in this band for this project. I don't think we could just, you know, come out with a straight up black metal record or something, you know. But like I say, I hope that it comes across to people as a singular entity, and not just like a bunch of you know, disparate elements kind of woven together for the sake of it. So but yeah, it would be easier, I guess, if we fit it under a one genre type, but there you go.
But I think that's the beauty of the record, is not having necessarily that defined umbrella that that then defines what the sound is. I think that's the whole beauty of it. It allows you to kind of discover the album as you progress. And that's the kind of question that I was going to ask you is, this record for me was an album that I synced into it, but I felt like I was taking a learning experience with each and every single song, and then allowing me to better process the song that came after because of what I had experienced before. So what thought process goes in terms of creating the structure that allows this kind of experience to exist?
It's kind of hard to answer, I guess. For each track, when we're approaching a song, we have an idea of like what we want that song to be and where it might fit in the context of an album, I suppose. So we'll know that when we're approaching a song, we'll say, okay, we want this one to be, you know, a little bit slower and moodier with you know, I don't know, like a heavy chug middle section, or we want this other track to maybe be a bit more progressive and go off in this kind of direction. But other than that, there's not really, like I say, it's not, there's no more of a grand design than that to it, really. It's just sort of how it turns out, to be honest.
So do you set any goals or boundaries when it comes to that time, when you start to kind of, you know, broadly define what do you want the song to be?
No, like that was so consciously for this record, I wanted, like I said, I wanted to widen the margins and sort of say, okay, anything could be up for, you know, anything could go into these tracks if it sounds good and if it has a certain kind of atmosphere, if it like has the right feeling, really. So like, for example, there's like cello intros in some of the tracks. There's Hammond organ in some of them. There are, you know, some syncopated bass drum parts that are a little bit more quirky sounding that we wouldn't have necessarily had in the past. So we have a track where there's like I think it's a five part vocal harmony backing vocal, and then it's doubled, and then there's another part, so there's something like 20 vocal parts going on at one particular part. So we were just like, let's just try anything and everything that sort of that sounds good to us, and as long as the feeling is sort of is consistent with what we're trying to put across. And that's what I would say with the tracks. Like, they're, you know, they all differ from each other, I think. You know, there's fast stuff and folky stuff and doomy stuff, but to me, like, the atmosphere and the feeling and the intent is consistent across the record. So that was the only sort of stipulation, I guess, we were maybe thinking about when we were putting it together.
And what part of this process do you start thinking about the lyrics and what those lyrics will represent?
Too late in the process is the answer, really, because it's probably my least favorite aspect of it, because I don't consider myself like a particularly good lyricist. But normally I'll have like a working title for the songs, and that's usually, like, for example, for the first single, I had the title Floodlands, and I knew kind of already, had some images in my head of what it would represent and what I kind of wanted to get across. Nothing on paper, but I kind of knew sort of rough thematic concepts, for example. So the vague ideas are kind of there whenever the music starts to come about. But in terms of the actual lyrics and words, that's usually later on. If we do another record, I'm going to try and flip that a little bit. But for this one, yeah, like the lyrics were sort of finished in the last few months before recording. But like I say, I kind of knew what the lyrical themes were going to be pretty much from the start, at least. So it wasn't like there was no chance that we were going to finish the music and then go, okay, well, let's write like lyrical concepts about, you know, wizards or something for this.
Yeah, it would feel completely out of place.
Yeah.
So is the lyrical aspect of the record the most challenging aspect of the record for you because it's your least favorite?
I find it, I mean, because for this one anyway, I wrote like most of the lyrics. Sarah wrote some lyrics for it as well. But it's very much the kind of thing where I need to be in practice, really. I need to be like writing a lot to feel like I'm in the zone with it. So yeah, I find it tricky. So, some songs come easier than others, like the Ashen Plague on this one, which is towards the end of the record. I bashed it out pretty quickly because I think the distance between the inspiration for the lyric and when I executed it was quite short. So I kind of came up with the idea for it and then just jumped on it, and then it came along a lot easier. Whereas for Floodlands, for example, I had the ideas for the themes way before, like a year before, and then I went to try and write it, and then it's harder to kind of sort of to execute your ideas sometimes when you've had like maybe it's the initial inspirations went off the boil, if you like. Mm-hmm. But it's something that I've been trying to get better at, and also I wasn't really that happy with the lyrics on the last record because a lot of them were like quite abstract and obtuse, and maybe like a little bit more difficult for the listener to relate to. So this time around, I wanted to sort of write lyrics that were still in the usual style, but were maybe a little bit easier to relate to, or maybe the meaning of the song wasn't so veiled in imagery and metaphor and this kind of thing, you know. But overall, I think I'm happy with the lyrics. But yeah, it's for me, I think it's a tricky aspect, really.
It's your Achilles heel. You mentioned the word dark before. One of the things I took from this album is while it has a very dark aspect to it in terms of the experience that it gives and the atmosphere that it creates, it still feels like it's filled with life and energy. How do you create an album that has that dark undertone but still feels like there's hope and then there's a light at the end of that dark tunnel?
Again, it wasn't preconceived. It just sort of turned out that way, because we had one of the oldest tracks, or one of the first tracks that we were working on for this was Tithonus, and it was basically I bought I'd been given a reverb pedal as a birthday present, and when I was playing around with it, I came up with the chord progression and the melody. But it just so happens that which is the intro melody, but it just so happens when you play this melody distorted, it's kind of like happy sounding almost, maybe not happy, but like I remember the guys turning around and they were saying like, this sounds like something off the Top Gun soundtrack or whatever. It's kind of like got an 80s glory about it. So I was like, well, I don't know what to tell you. It's just that's what it sounds like. So again, we just thought, well, it sounds good. It somehow fits. So let's go for it. But I wouldn't say that we sat down and tried to like weave in slivers of light through the dark passages or anything. It's just the way it pans out, really, whenever we're working on stuff. I think if you get to a point where you've got 2 or 3 tracks and things seem like maybe the vibe is a bit overbearing, or if all the songs are like very heavy and very downbeat or something, you'd maybe consciously say, well, we need to mix this up here a little bit. But in this case, it just sort of happened naturally as we were putting the tracks together.
I have to ask you about my favorite song on the record, 1,000 Years of Night. How did that song came to light? No pun intended.
Pretty much from, we had a jam session, again, this is like a couple of years before we did the record, where I think I came up with like the main melody, like the main little guitar motif, and that's kind of all I had. And there were some other parts, but they all went in the bin. And but I kept that bit. I mean, some of the other guys mentioned as well, like that's like a really cool little melody. We should try and do something with that. And there were many versions of that song where I didn't know what the rest of the track was supposed to be. I just knew that like this little melody is super cool. So I had that, and then I was messing around with using a violin bow on the guitar, kind of like Jimmy Page, I guess, but just doing some drones. And it was in the same key, and it sort of led in nicely to that melody. And eventually we just replaced that guitar bit with cello. But that was really the basis for the track. The rest of it, once I kind of figured out, okay, let's just make this like a mid-pace kind of doom song. the rest of it just sort of came together pretty naturally. And then our singer like laid down this really great melody. I was like, dude, this sounds like Messiah Marcolin or something. And he turns around and says, I have to confess, I haven't ever actually listened, because I was like, you know, like Candlemas, and he goes, I've never listened to Candlemas. I was like, how have we been in the band together for like?
How is that possible?
I know, it's like, how have we, you know, and he's like a big music fan, but his range of tastes is huge. But I was like, how have you never listened to Candlemas? This is crazy. And he was like, oh, I don't know. But yeah, that one turned out pretty good. Pretty happy with that. Yeah, it's when the chorus hits, like it's yeah, it's a good one, I think.
I have one last question for you, and maybe this is a question that I'm asking it too early. Maybe I should ask you this question a year from now, 2 years from now. When you look at Wither Divine, how much is this record going to influence the path that the band is going to take going forward?
Well, two parts to that, I guess, musically and in general. So hopefully, if like I say, because we've been on hiatus, we had been on a hiatus for a while. So hopefully, if there's a little bit of momentum after this record and gets a little bit of buzz and stuff, like we're trying to line up some gigs and festivals and things at the minute. So I'm really hoping it'll kick things off again for us, that we can get out and play, keep doing shows and doing what we love, really. So hopefully it'll be the starting point for that. Fingers crossed. But I don't know. There's so many records and so many bands out at the minute, and the touring situation and live situation is absolutely dreadful. So it's kind of hard to know how that'll go. But fingers crossed. And musically, I can already have ideas for what I would like to do with the next album, and where I would like to bring things, like a step beyond again, like another step away from what we have been doing. That would be like a natural progression from this one. And I think there's some really interesting stuff there, but I just hopefully we get a chance to do it, really. But I think yeah, I think this record like reignited a fire in all of us for sure. And I think there's some interesting places we can go musically with it if we're able to. So yeah, fingers crossed, year or two we'll be working on some new stuff. And
oh, for what it's worth, one of the best albums I heard all year. I mean, this album was phenomenal. It caught me off guard. I didn't know what to expect when I pressed play, but the moment I pressed play, I couldn't press stop. So it's just like an incredible, it hits home with me. I really liked the sound that you guys created. I really like the experience that you guys created. And it's just a record that never gets old. It doesn't matter if I'm listening to it for the first or the 100th time. It always feels so fresh when you're listening to it. So congratulations on putting together such an incredible record.
Well, thank you so much. Like, I really appreciate that. We're only really starting to get reviews and reactions and things. We've been sitting on this record for the guts of a year, really. So it's really nice to hear some positive feedback like that. And you never really know what people are going to make of it, you know. So
if people are not saying anything good about it, then they're not listening to it. So they should go check themselves with a doctor or something. There's something wrong. There's something wrong in between their ears, because this album is just, it's a really well done, well crafted record. It feels seamless in the way it transports the listener, but it has so much texture in it. So it's a beautiful album from that point of view.
Thank you. I deeply appreciate that. Thank you so much. Hopefully, like you say, if people give it a chance, I think that there's something in there that people should enjoy, but it's just people giving it a chance in the first place.
Yeah. Once they do, then they're going to get hooked for sure. Well, hey, thank you very much for your time, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you, and all the best to you and the rest of the guys in the band with this release. Nothing but love is what I wish for you and everyone. This record is phenomenal. So thank you once again.
No problem. Thank you. Appreciate you taking the time and the review and everything. Thanks so much, man.
Oh, my pleasure. Take care. All the best.
All right. See you around. Cheers.